So this morning I wanted to give you some examples for how you might use data to design some improvement work in your department. And embedded in here are just little sort of gems, I think, things that I picked up in the more than 100 ERs I've been in trying to help them improve that you may not find in a textbook. They're not statistically sound, but they're just from experience, things that I've come across, and so have other consultants that I've worked with. So little gems hidden in there. Data integrity. There is so much data available about your emergency department. In fact, I just did an assessment, and I received data from 10 different sources at the hospital. It did not match. Oh, by the way, they were comparing averages to medians for times, which are you going to look better or worse if they use averages? Probably. You probably look worse, right? And so I would just start out with a little pitch to you. Own your data. Any data that's relevant to the ER, you should go on a quest and say, I want access to it, I want to own it. Scrub it, validate it, and make sure that what's being circulated about your department is real and is fair. In order to inform your operations, you're going to need to know who's coming to you, and so this is basic information that you should, if you don't have in your head, you should know where you could get it. What's your age breakdown, your ESI breakdown, your admission rate, EMS rate, chief complaint data. We still don't have a standardized chief complaint system, but kind of knowing what's coming to you is helpful. And then both arrivals and census in the department. Those are two different things, right? How many people are arriving by month, by day of the week, by hour of the day, and then how many are in your department. You should have access to that data. For grins, how many of you could pull that in a half an hour? How many of you have all of that data and look at it regularly? Like, great. This is what the painful business of the EMR is finally going to lead us to. We have some useful data. Then I like to know what volume of patients and percent of patients, door-to-doc, walkaways, length of stay, admit decision to departure, and admission rates. Overall, you can probably get that, but can you get it by ESI? How many of you are tracking all of those different metrics by ESI? How many of you are tracking it by geographic zone in your department? Great. This is the way we're going to go and move forward. And how many of you are tracking it and providing it to your providers? See, feedback loops to providers, that's how you're going to move the dot. Almost all of you are on your way to a fast track and a mid track, or you already have them, because the average ED now is, remember, it used to be 40,000 visits was a busy ED. We're all getting bigger. We're all becoming Walmart. I think a fast track should see at least 13%. I know Kirk Jensen thinks it should be way more than that, but if you have a mid-track, a fast track should be seeing at least 13%. Your mid-track, remember he talked about vertical and horizontal patients. We don't know yet, no one's got enough data to understand what percentage of ESI 3s are vertical and what percentage are horizontal. We don't know that yet. But let's just say as a ballpark, half of your ESI 3s should be able to be treated in a vertical fashion, just overall. Your fast track, the admission rate should approach 0, but probably not be 0, because if it's 0, maybe you're being too strict about who you're streaming there. Your mid-track should have an admission rate halfway between what 0 and the overall admission rate. Length of stay targets, that's the only way that you are going to take your ER to the next level, is to have strict targets for each geographic zone and level of care you're delivering. And I like 90 minutes or less for a fast track, under 3 hours for a mid-track. And then another term on the bottom, you may not have heard this before. Anybody heard the term pod velocity? Pod velocity is the number of patients that you can turn in that area per hour. And so tracking that can kind of help you. So here, we'll just take a few problems, take their data, and see what kind of solutions we could come up with. So this was a smaller critical access hospital, 30 patients a day, admission rate only 11%. They have a 9-bed ED, one attending, working 12-hour shifts. They have 29% geriatrics, which is kind of high, but they also have 37% patients, 4s and 5s, that could be seen in a fast track. You're going to have a fast track when you're single covered? No. So what else could you come up with to meet the needs of those low acuity patients? Out of interest, anybody in the room have a similar kind of a makeup or close enough that this is applying? We have any smaller ERs? Yeah. So your challenges are somewhat different, aren't they? How are you going to meet the needs of those geriatric patients, but also those 4s and 5s? This is where they started. Those were their metrics: door to doc, length of stay for admitted, discharge, so forth, left before treatment complete. This isn't terrible, folks, but if you compared it to the under 20,000 volume band performance for EDBA in 2016, they weren't where they wanted to be. So this was the change package, and I'll talk more tomorrow about the concept of a change package. I want you to think about improvements, not just tinkering a little bit. I want you to think about boldly choosing, based on data, improvements that you would implement at once in a change package. Because I want to tell you, it's hugely exciting, and you get so much bang for the buck. And a lot of times you'll do complementary changes and have them go live all at once. And you'll see some cases both today and tomorrow. So they had advanced triage order sets, which I think is old news. Most people have order sets that a nurse is allowed to start. They are usually diagnostic and not therapeutic in most cases, but they kind of wandered away from them. How many of you have right now advanced triage order sets, if you want to call them such, standardized order sets? If you do not have them, or you're just interested, we developed them for Intermountain Healthcare 20 years ago. I'm happy to share them. All you got to do is tell me. I will send you our standardized order sets that we use in all of our ERs. Sometimes it's just nice to see what somebody else is doing. So this was their change package. Let me just march through. They needed to develop a strategy for when they had capacity, i.e. low flow. And so this is their low flow model. Do all of you have a high flow and a low flow model that everyone in your department could articulate for me right now? So if I went to your ER and I picked any nurse, I'd say, well, what do you do in high flow, i.e. all your beds are full? Then what do you do? How many of you have a high flow process? Clearly articulated, turn it on. That's not too bad. So I want to encourage you. I think that's that's on your to-do list for 2018. So this was their intake process when they had beds, which is most of the day, traditional pull to full kind of a model, and a team triage at the bedside. They developed a high flow model, which was going to the patient in a chair in the ER. Obviously, sick patients were bedded, but everybody else, bringing doctor and nurse and getting the workup started. Now, if the doctor's busy, the nurse can turn on advanced triage order sets. But they called this their rapid assessment zone. You will see that term in the literature in a number of places. There's a rapid assessment zone report, I think, on Urgent Matters website, if you want to see how some people are doing it. But you see they have a process now for when there's no beds. Here's advanced triage order sets. They developed them, and I mentioned, I will share them with you, usually chief complaint driven. And this is very interesting. They started out, see that one little lounge chair that they got from infusion therapy? That was going to be their rapid assessment zone. They moved it around until they found the place they thought was the best. They found a little cubby, actually, that used to be a registration office, to be the rapid assessment zone. When they're in high flow, doc and nurse go there, boom, see the patient, get things started. Oh, by the way, look at this picture. See their lovely storage room? It was a very nice storage room. It has since been converted to a behavioral health unit. So even small ERs are struggling with the behavioral health burden and having to find accommodation. And then bridge orders. You will remember that at one time, ASAP was very negative on the concept of bridge orders, also known as timed out orders, transition orders. How many of you have these in place at your shop? So now I want you to know ASAP has very much softened their position. I'll tell you what, these are considered a best practice at IHI. Smaller facilities, for instance, this hospital, they had, the only way they could cover their hospitalist on call was to hire people to work a week at a time. So if your hospitalist is working 7 days straight, he's got to get some sleep in there sometime. And so to accommodate, the ED would put these orders in. They're basically a holding order that was passed through the MEC, and that let the hospitalist get a little sleep. Same thing, they only had 2 surgeons on call. That put you on call every other night for your life. And so to accommodate and help the surgeons, they would often have some admit orders that they would bed a patient down. So that was their change package. This is just showing you their metrics before and after. Quite a lot of success there to be had. And they chose, based on data, the improvements that they needed. Here's our second problem. What about a lot of middle acuity patients and managing them? So this was kind of an interesting streaming problem. This ER, pretty busy, 182. It was an academic affiliate, 182 patients a day. Admission rate of 30%, kind of high. Why? I think it's probably a true geriatric ER. 33% of their patients were geriatric. And yet they still had 46% of their patients were ESI 3. This is their, if you look at their ESI breakdown, it's shifted towards a higher acuity. But that doesn't mean you don't have to take care of those lower acuity patients. Who got short shrift in this ER? Remember I said I want you tracking it by ESI? So look at door to doc and length of stay, especially door to doc by ESI. You're a 3, 4, 5, you're waiting, man. They just always got put on the back burner, so they wanted to address that problem. Don't get lost in the numbers, don't get scared, but I want to show you some key things if you'll walk through it with me. Their team 3 was a fast track. So the third line down, look at team 3. They had 9 beds. What do you think about 9-bed fast track for an ER this size? I think it's too big, actually. I think it's too big. And indeed, one of the things that we noticed is non-fast track patients got put in it, like a 90-year-old abdominal pain. Then look at, so 9 beds, they're only able to see 12.3% of the patients. Notice the ESI, 3.3. Where do you want your fast track ESI to be? Probably over 4, right? Because you want them to be the lowest acuity. I want you to see their admission rate was 10%. That's pretty high for a fast track. Remember we said you want your admission rate in a fast track to be really low. And then the really telling point is, look how long the fast track patients stay relative to the other patients. They stay a long time, don't they? So this suggested there was not clean streaming. I also wanted you to look at their team 4. Team 4 was their first effort at vertical treatment. They put chairs, not much different, in fact, they had less padding than what you're sitting on right now, in classroom-style rows facing a television. It was the darndest thing to see, because they just were not very sure-footed. They didn't want to invest in their recliners. They thought, well, let's just try it out. And so once again, I want you to look at Team 4. Now, this is even more worrisome to me. Team 4 was supposed to be a vertical model for ESI 3s. Look at their ESI relative to Team 1 and 2, which are their acute care beds. Look at the length of stay. What's going on there? Their vertical model is just seeing like everyday patients, just putting them in hard chairs. They're basically acute care patients. So we knew we had some streaming to clean up. Oh, hold on. So their strategies were going to shrink the fast track and make it be true fast track patients. Give some of those beds back if they needed them for sicker patients. Implement a true mid-track. Have clear inclusion and exclusion. By the way, when you're beginning a new stream, it's much easier to start with exclusion criteria than inclusion criteria. Just say, so I like, for instance, a new fast track, say no IVs, no MRIs, we're fast track. We're going to get these patients out in 90 minutes. Same thing, you can develop some exclusion criteria. I have had a lot of mid-tracks where we don't forbid IVs, but we say minimal IV medications in a mid-track. They're sitting in a chair, they're going to go home. Can we treat them without starting an IV? So, like I say, start with the exclusion criteria. And what we wanted to do, because we realized the problem, we wanted to clean up the geography so people were dedicated to a zone because they were running around all over. And this was roughly their flow model. They were basically still bedding all ambulances and sending them to their acute care, which they called major care. They were sending everybody else through a team triage. The physician in the team triage would decide who's going to the vertical model or who's going to fast track. That was their streaming. So cleaned it up. Don't you like this better for a mid-track? That's kind of comfortable. It was wildly popular. They spent $1,000 on screens to go between the patients. The patient asked them to move the screens. They like to talk to each other, so be prepared. They like to talk to each other, like, get that out of the way. So. Now look at what, remember I showed you before, door to doc in the lower acuity was so high, we got that shortened. And if you looked at overall, now this was the stunning thing, and I thought for a time they might want to kill me. Notice the door-to-dock, how much it improved by cleaning up the streaming, improving the flow, just tightening it up, everything. Oh, by the way, we cleaned up standard work for everybody. We just really tightened up that ER. So once the word was out on the street that you could get into that to see a doctor in 18 minutes, look what happened to their volume. That a 10% increase in volume because when the word was out on the street that it was easier. And they were very happy. As you can see, everything. Fast Track cleaned that up a bit, didn't we? ESI 3s now, we've got them in almost 3 hours. So that was a great project. All right, here's another problem that data suggested and some of the solutions. This was a great Fast Track. There was 5-bed Fast Track. Let me show you some details about it. It's a 216 patients a day tertiary teaching hospital with residents, admission rate of 21%, in part because they've got a large pediatric ED. That their 5-bed Fast Track, what do you think of this? 2 APPs staff it from 9 to 7, and they're seeing 12 patients a day. Anybody have a problem with that? Must be cushy, right? And so I said, and then I also want length of stay for the Fast Track, 143 minutes. I said, to the APPs, I said, why are the patients here so long? They said, well, it takes a long time to get an MRI. Can you tell me a Fast Track patient that should be getting an MRI? Like, hello, right? So in any case, we decided that we needed to have a new way to flow patients that would remedy some of this. The other thing that happened is the APPs would look at the chief complaints and change the destination of the patients. Oh, that's not Fast Track appropriate. That's how you get down to 12 a day when there's 2 of you working, my friends. Oh, that's not Fast Track appropriate, okay? So here was the other thing that I thought was very interesting. The gray is the staffing of that unit, and the red was the arrivals of the low acuity patients. So you can see how they're bringing on staff when they really don't need to. They're turning off staff when they've still got people arriving who stay, remember, 143 minutes. So then what was happening was, and you understand this is kind of a phenomenon, not just of APPs, but of millennials in general, they're done at the end of their shift, right? So anybody that was in the Fast Track now had to get moved to the main ED. So all of these things were a problem. So here's what we did. Physician was going to see all low acuity. They basically just put all the sick patients into acute care beds, but everybody else went through a physician in triage. They also had a de facto no refusal policy. So if a physician sees and says this is Fast Track appropriate, the sort of new approach was we're going to accept that. That's not to say you discover something new about a patient. Oh my gosh, he's tachycardic and look, he's in AFib. Fine. But in general, it was a no refusal policy. We tightened up the criteria and had those great exclusion criteria. We expanded some of the hours later into the night to accommodate the low acuity. And I'll tell you, this is how you're going to get where you want to be, having clear expectations of numbers of patients to be seen and efficiency goals for every area in your unit. Every geographic zone should have those expectations. That's how you get where you're going to be the most highest performing. So this is showing their model. Mind you, I like most academic places to do ESI 1 and 2 to your major care zones, ESI 4 and 5, screen them, peel them off right away to go to a Fast Track, and just have 3s go through a physician in triage. But they needed that extra touch of a physician up front. And so we changed their flow model to that. This is showing you how the Fast Track did. Before, 12 patients a day. After, 32 patients a day. And my friends, single coverage. 1 APP, 32 patients. What do you think? A part of it was like being very careful who goes there, really strict expectations, productivity goals, and so forth. And you can see all of the wait times came down. So this was a huge success for just the Fast Track part. All right, here's the fourth case that I wanted to sort of show you. This is a busy teaching hospital. It's academic. They see 188 patients a day. Their admission rate was 25%. They have a 12-bed Fast Track, 20-bed trauma suite that is staffed above all else and run by surgery without emergency medicine. Anybody still got that kind of thing? That's a pretty archaic, that was like emergency medicine in the 80s where trauma ran trauma and ER wasn't even allowed to touch it. Does anybody still have that? I know I have one person in the audience that has that, but yeah, I mean, this is just, these are some of the problems that they're working on that are organizational and so forth. 8-bed resuscitation suite, 35 acute care bed, which, by the way, do you know a lot of larger centers are now going to a critical care unit, and it's a mix of the deathly ill, medical, and trauma. And that is great because you have great cooperation between trauma and emergency medicine. Nobody does, acute critical care like ER. Often a fellowship evolves out of it. So I just want you to know there's sort of a new mental model of having a space in your department where we take care of just really sick people and dedicate nurses to it and have the staffing appropriate and so forth, as opposed to segmenting off trauma. And so they also had 35 acute care beds. What do you think about the bed count? 188 patients a day, all those beds. 43, 60, 76, something. I think that's kind of luxurious. That's a lot of beds. A lot of beds. Might be, sometimes, believe it or not, there can be too many beds. But look at the admission length of stay. So part of the problem is because they have the beds, no one is sort of helping them to get patients upstairs. All right, so that's one of their issues. Those are long lengths of stay. Patients come and bring sleeping bags to sit in the waiting room because they count on that. They were bringing it down, but they still had a ways to go. You can see the length of stay coming down. But then we get into this black box of getting patients admitted. And I'd suggest to you that if you're at an academic tertiary teaching center, there's a lot in that black box, a lot of things that happen. And sometimes we think, and the knee-jerk was that it was a problem inside the hospital, they're not giving us beds and so forth. Each of these things takes time, right? Anybody experiencing what is being called the contested admission? You call to admit a patient and you're negotiating for 3 hours to get them upstairs, right? It's, can I say what, I am seeing it in small, even critical access hospitals. This is a problem of our time that we're really going to have to address. So that takes up a part of what you would think of as boarding. You've decided to admit the patient and they're still in your department. Then bed assignments. This can be problematic as well, because have you heard your colleagues on the inpatient side talk about geography? We got to have geography. Who's got geography at their hospital? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where certain services have all their beds together. It's a great idea, although I'm old enough, I remember running through the hospital to different towers to see different patients, but now they have geography. This makes bed placement more difficult. So I've sat in an ER where there's 32 boarders, and we have 25 beds, but we can't make no matches. Oh, that's not geography, that's the wrong service. Oh, it's a male bed, it's a female bed, it's infection, it's not infection. And so that piece can take time. And then you have some hospital side services like cleaning the room and transporting the patient. So housekeeping and transport. So all this together is that part of that black box of getting patients admitted. We actually took the time to flesh this out. To be honest with you, I would rather see bed assignment 30 minutes, patient to room 30 minutes, but those aren't so bad. Where's that delay, that negotiation we're talking about, that contested admission? What can you do about this? It's bigger than you, to be sure, but there are some tricks that you should know about. One thing is admission agreements. Stanford has crafted some admission agreements. If anybody wants, we send them to the document. It's actually a one-pager that just clearly says who's going where. It's hard because patients are getting more and more complicated, right? And so they could belong on any one of 5 services. But so you create some rules. There's also evolving, and I've seen this now at Brown University, Penn State Hershey, the no refusal policy, which is basically when the ER does their best, they're empowered to pick a service, and then I'm going to call whoever I think is appropriate. I love this version of it. This is what they're doing at Penn State Hershey. If the person I call says, oh, no, that shouldn't go to medicine, that should go to ortho. They must make the calls. to get that patient accepted at another service. And you know what? So in all earnest, one of these orthopedists said to me, he goes, do you know how long I spend on the phone calling people? And I was like, welcome to our world, right? Right? This is not news to us. So anyway, no refusal policies. You're starting to see that. Now, mind you, has to go through your bylaws, be passed by your MEC. You can't do this on yourself. You can't just say to your colleagues, you can't refuse me. Right? There needs to be some processes in place. The other thing is, if you have residents, how many of you work a place with residents? These conversations must be escalated to the attending level quickly. You can't allow residents to just be back and forth doing that 3-hour negotiation trying to sell a patient to be admitted. So these are some of the strategies that people are finding, and you know, everybody, you might as well start tackling it, because if you aren't feeling this yet, you will. Some interesting data, it's not published, but I've gathered this in my travels, if you will. We tried to capture what percentage of admissions do we have to fight about. And this was one place, one teaching hospital, Virginia Commonwealth University. We put in a mechanism. It wasn't, not the most, because it required some self-reporting. But for a finite period of time, we asked the ER to use an icon that we put on the top of the desktop computer to indicate when they had to start making multiple calls. It was 40%. I'll bet you anything, because it's self-report, that's probably low. So think about how much extra work this is for you, okay? Then, now this is interesting. What do they tell you why they want you to order the CAT scan, the MRI, before the patient comes up? What's the myth? Oh, you get it faster. The ER can get it faster. We want you to get this, and this, because the ER can get it faster. So you've got to love this. And it's not published, but I know that you could validate it with Penn State Hershey, because they're very proud of it. They actually studied many imaging, lab, other ancillary service testing, whether the order to results in the ER and compared it to order to results for inpatients, 15 minutes, my friends. So the 15-minute advantage of ordering a study from the ER probably does not, make it worthwhile to keep those patients so long in the ER. So again, unpublished. And then I was telling you that I believe that the added time for these negotiations is often approaching the 3-hour mark. So just some numbers to have to just kind of throw around. So I can't give you the results of that project because it's a work in progress, but I actually can tell you that the dean of the medical school has taken up the cause and wants to implement a no refusal policy at this particular site, which would be lovely, wouldn't it? And so we'll get I know there's people wanting to clap in the audience. The chairman is here. Bruce, you mind if I introduce you? Bruce Adams. He's at UT San Antonio, and he's been working on this. I feel like they were just dealing with a great burden. Getting a patient admitted, to me, seems like to be a miracle as I watched it try to play out. But they've engaged the medical school to try and help them, the hospital try and help them, and so forth. So what I wanted you to take home from these stories is that you can use data to select the improvement projects that are appropriate. I want to just encourage you, be bold. Do several things at once that deal with the problems that are the most pressing to you, and then use the data to track and monitor your results. And you can all do this. This is really possible. Tomorrow I'll have some more success stories for you to hear that I hope you'll appreciate. Any questions, comments? Anybody? Okay, excellent. Thank you.